All right, thank you everyone for joining us today. It's our the Fuel Cell Partnership quarterly update on hydrogen status in California. Today we have Keith Malone, Public Relations Manager, as well as, and this is Ben Zong, I manage digital communications with the Fuel Cell Partnership. We've been getting a lot of questions about what the California Fuel Cell Partnership does, specifically if we fund or operate hydrogen stations in California. The Fuel Cell Partnership does not fund or operate stations in California. We're a industry government collaboration aimed at expanding the market for fuel cell electric vehicles. And our success is directly linked to the commitment and involvement of our member organizations. Here's a list of all the members of the Fuel Cell Partnership. We just added 5 new members to the Fuel Cell Partnership, including Anglo American, Nikola, Iwatani, TLM Petro, and Hexagon Lincoln. If your organization would like to be a part of the conversation in moving hydrogen and fuel cell technology forward, please contact us at info@cafcp.org. Before we get started, I just wanted to take care of a couple of administrative items. First, everyone is muted. However, we encourage you to ask questions using the GoToWebinar application. Also, this webinar is being recorded and will be posted on our website next week. Once it is posted, we will send out an email directing you to exactly where it is on our website. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Keith.
Thank you very much. Next slide, Ben. Ben, can you move to the next? There we go. So for those who may not be aware, on our website under the resources tab, we have a page that we update on a monthly basis called By the Numbers. And as you can see, in the last month or so, we've surpassed 5,000 light-duty passenger vehicles here in California and by extension in the US. We've also updated numbers for fuel cell buses. And so just know you can always check back on a monthly basis. We try and get these numbers around the first of the month, but sometimes some of the data we get, it takes a little bit of time, but we try and keep it accurate. We've also started, if you go to the actual web page, we are now beginning to collect data from our Japanese partners, and hopefully down the road we'll begin to collect data from around the globe as well, as we start to kind of see how others collect their numbers and what they actually mean, and making sure that we're all kind of talking about the same thing and making sure that everything looks can be easily understood. So I want to kind of put this webinar in context, and certainly we're talking about California primarily. As you know, in the last webinar, we expanded and started to talk about what's going on in the Northeast and the Pacific Northwest and Hawaii. But just to kind of give you kind of a sense of what's going on here in California, right now our first milestone that we're aiming for is 100 strategically located light-duty stations, and that's been funded already by Assembly Bill 8 that was passed back in 2013. As you may recall from the last webinar, and you've seen probably in other places, our Governor Jerry Brown, announced that he'd like to see a total of 200 stations by 2025. So in the background, we're working to lift the cap on funding for that to ensure that we can make that goal in time. And then, as you know from the last webinar, we recently released our vision for 2030 here in California, which calls for 1,000 stations, which serve upwards of 1 million vehicles. And that 2030 vision aligns with the governor's goals for 2030 as well, where he's called for 5 million zero-emission vehicles. And as you can see down at the bottom, I've included a number of links for you that you can look at, which includes the 2030 vision, which we call the California Fuel Cell Revolution, and then kind of a handout that looks similar to this particular slide, the 100, 200, 1,000 stations. And then we've also included 1 or 2 others, other links that would be, I think, of help to you. So we reached out to our colleagues at Hyundai to ask them what can we share with our webinar attendees about the Nexo that's coming out. They don't have numbers for price, for lease, or for sale yet, and they don't have a specific date yet. They did indicate that they will bring this to California before the end of the year, but they did provide us with some specs. And so these are going to be, you can follow up with these later. This is really kind of a little bit of a dive in here with a lot of numbers, but I wanted to point out something to you in the lower part of this particular matrix, where it says driving range, because you see two different, they're referring to a blue and a limited version of the Nexo. And I wanted to just give you a little bit of insight on that one. I actually talked with my colleague at Hyundai who indicated that the blue version comes with 17-inch wheels, and the limited comes with 19-inch wheels, plus a sunroof, a power tailgate, and other features that are not available on the blue model. So just wanted to give you a little bit of a kind of a teaser of what's to come here in California over the next couple of months. So as we indicated, there's not much has changed since the last webinar. We have some of the same stations we listed earlier. Burbank is in the final stages of its upgrade. We're looking forward to having that open soon. We know that LAX and Palo Alto are in their final stages. We should be seeing them. Emeryville, of course, is being upgraded. One side, of course, at Emeryville is fueling the buses at AC Transit. The other side will upgrade its support for passenger vehicles. And we're beginning construction is well underway in the Sacramento area. We know a lot of people have been asking about that because there's only one station right now there in West Sacramento, but lots of good signs, and word has it we'll be seeing them open up sometime in early 2019. So just to give you, just here are some of the charts that kind of show where we're at in terms of retail station development and the total number of vehicle sales and leases. In previous slides on previous webinars, in terms of the development stage, the governor's office of business and economic development had kind of broken down the in-development portion of this into smaller sorts of categories. They've chosen not to going forward, but I think this gives us kind of a clearer sense in the way they've done it, so we can kind of see the progression and see how far we're coming. In the next webinar, I promise I'll give you a better update on kind of where we are and what we expect to see. We probably are going to have about, I think, 6 stations open up, and actually not 6 stations. In the first 6 months of next year, we're going to see a number of stations open up. I wish I could give you more specific numbers, but as we know, it's a construction process, and we've tried not to make very specific details as to when stations will open, because oftentimes with a construction project, just some things can be delayed, and so we want to make sure we balance our enthusiasm with some amount of realism. So as we go forward and we, as we see the support for funding infrastructure, our members and others are looking for other means of incentivizing developers to come in and develop stations here in California. One of them is the low carbon fuel standard, or LCFS, as you'll often hear. And recently, several of our members working on their own proposed amendments to LCFS that would enable, that would create an incentive for infrastructure capacity. And at the last board meeting of the California Resources Board, they approved these amendments, and we should see that those amendments take effect in January of 2019. As part of this proposal, as part of this infrastructure credit, you'll note at the bottom here where it says the proposal increases renewable hydrogen content to 40%. As you may have heard in the past, currently in California, we require that at least 33% of the hydrogen being dispensed at stations must come from renewable sources. So this starts to take it up a notch.
Keith, there's a question to ask if you can clarify.
Sure. you know, the low carbon fuel standard has been in effect for about 10 years now. It's meant to really drive down the carbon levels in all types of fuels, and especially push us towards alternative and renewable fuels. And this particular infrastructure, these amendments, it's the first time they've added infrastructure into the low carbon fuel standard. It's not just about the fuel itself, but this is a method of incentivizing building and expanding station capacity beyond what we have right now. What we've seen in California is with each generation of station, we're building bigger stations to accommodate the need and the sales of vehicles. And as we've tried to roll out stations, the state has been really kind of careful about querying automakers and where they see themselves over the next 3 years. And they do this yearly. And we've always tried to make sure that the infrastructure kind of keeps pace with and stays just a little bit ahead of those vehicle rollouts. And what we've discovered in the last couple of years is that we need to really move beyond a certain level of capacity and really anticipate the growth that we think is coming. And so that's where this low carbon fuel standard infrastructure amendment, or I should say amendments, really comes into play. So I'm going to turn this over to Ben for the moment to talk about the station map and SOS.
All right, thanks, Keith. So first off, I want to thank the fuel cell electric vehicle drivers that participate on the Facebook groups. I've had a number of questions about what tools are available for them to find stations near them, as well as what's the current real-time status of stations. So that way they know if they drive up there, can they use that particular station at that time. And so I want to touch on three main tools that's available to you as a fuel cell electric vehicle driver or potential driver. The first is our resources website. And so if you go to our website at CaFCP.org, on the top right of our menu is our resources link. Clicking on that link takes you to our new resources page that was recently launched earlier this year. This is a dynamic page that lists all of our resources, including documents as well as links. By default, it's filtered by all of the documents that's available, as well as the documents that were most recently updated. So by dynamic, I mean that if you click on any of the filters here, it will change, as well as if you're searching for something, as you start typing in that document, it will also change the table here as well. I want to touch on 4 documents that will be of interest to this group, I think. The first is our hydrogen stations list. So this document lists all of the stations that are currently open as well as in development. It has the address as well as when it's expected to open and what its current development status is. The second document is our cumulative sales data. So I think Keith touched on this before. He had a screenshot of it. It's also available as a page on our website by the numbers, and it is essentially a cumulative count of all of the vehicles sold since 2016. The third document is our stations map. It's a PDF, and we often get questions about, images that folks can use for presentations. This is again available for you to download and use. It has both Southern California stations as well as Northern California stations. And then the last document is our Revolution document that Keith touched on earlier. And again, that's a 24-page document that you can access via this page here. So the second resource that's available is our station map. This is a location-based tool. And what I mean by that is essentially you can move, or it has a list view on the right-hand side. But depending on where you move this map, that list will change based on your preference. So for instance, if you're looking for stations in the Sacramento area, you can filter this by stations that are in development, and again, move it to Sacramento area, and it'll show just those stations for you. If you click on the station, it'll give you a little bit more detail about when it's expected to open and who's the operator of that station. If you click on the open stations, so these are the green stations here, it will also give you the real-time status of that station. However, I want to point out again that this map is primarily used for tracking the development status of the stations. If you want to find out the real-time status of that station at the current time, we recommend using our Station Operational Status System, or SOS. And so this page can be found at m.cfcp.org. You can also go to the station map, and on the very bottom, there's a link to SOS, and that will take you to our SOS system as well. So SOS, again, it tells you in real time whether the station is open, whether it's or online, offline, or in a limited state. A green circle means that it's currently online. A yellow triangle means that it's currently in limited status, means that you can fill up there, but it's not going to give you a full fill. A red square means that's offline, so if you show up at that time, you're not going to get fuel. And then we also have an unknown status. So that means that we've lost connection with that current station at the time. If you see a question mark, I recommend clicking on the station. So for instance, if you're interested in West Sacramento, click on that station. We have a customer service number there. I recommend calling that number and checking what the current status is. Just because it's not showing a status doesn't mean it's necessarily offline. Again, it just means that we've lost connectivity to that station. Also, for this system, we have our info at. So if there's something going on at the station, for instance, there's a planned maintenance that's going to happen within the next couple of weeks, or if there's a supply shortage, typically the station developers will hop onto the system and add a note on there indicating when it might be back online, or the duration of it being offline. And then lastly, SOS has the capability to, or you can create an account on SOS by going to the very top and signing up for an account. The benefits of that is you can sign up to receive notifications when the station changes status. So for instance, if you sign up for Anaheim, you can, when it changes status from an online status to an offline status, it will send you a text message or an email based on your preference. Also, I recommend, so this website, it's a mobile-friendly site. You can access it on any mobile device. You can also access it on your PC as well. I recommend adding this to your homepage. In one of our previous webinars, I've talked a little bit about how to do that. And if you have any questions, feel free to contact me either through Facebook or at the bottom, I also have my email on there as well. So you can contact me directly there as well. All right, with that, Keith, I'm going to pass it back to you.
Great, thank you, Ben. And I want to add that the resources page that Ben showed you, we upgraded that to really make it a resource, not just for you, but that we use. Whenever I find documents that I think are important and are relevant, we add them in. So it's, I want to let you know that that's not just a page that we created because we thought it would be fun or some things might be good, but it's something that we definitely use. So moving on, kind of one of the newest categories over the last year or so, that globally speaking is a very kind of hot, I shouldn't say it a hot topic, but it's really a pathway that policymakers globally want to accelerate, is the trucks and the heavy duty category. In the past, I've talked about buses. In the future, I want to talk more about buses because there's some really interesting stuff going on here in California. But on the truck side, just this in the last couple of months, we had a major funding announcement out of the California Air Resources Board, an $82 million project, of which the Air Resources Board funded $41 million of it, coming out of the Port of LA with a partnership of Toyota, Kenworth, and Shell. Absolutely fascinating project, really a strong indicator of where things are going here in California. I'd say over the next 2 to 3 years, you're probably going to see another probably 5 to 10 fuel cell trucks really starting to work out of the ports, both Long Beach as well as Los Angeles. And I wanted to point out, in the past, we've shown this, you'll see a fuel cell, you'll see a ferry boat with the Golden Gate Bridge in the background. They were, this project with the red and white fleet, it was recently funded by the Air Resources Board. So we are actually building the first fuel cell ferry here in the U.S. I was talking with the lead on the project. He said they're going to have a keel laying ceremony coming up shortly. It's the equivalent of a groundbreaking for a building, and it signifies the start of construction. So they told me that construction would take about 9 months, and the boat should be in the water by August or September of 2019. So we're looking forward, hopefully soon, to give you a better update on the details as they start to build it. But lots of exciting items here. And down below, I've included 2 announcements about this particular truck project, as well as the other truck project coming out of the Port of Long Beach. So as I mentioned earlier, California has hydrogen on a renewable pathway. Some of you may have heard in early September during the San Francisco Global Climate Summit that the Hydrogen Council, which is a group composed of CEOs from companies in Asia, Europe, and the United States, they committed to decarbonizing hydrogen fuel by 2030. So look for further announcements over the next year or so about efforts globally to kind of really become more aggressive on that pathway. As part of this, in the last webinar, we announced that the California Energy Commission had funded a renewable hydrogen project out in California's Inland Empire. And they just recently added 2 more renewable hydrogen projects, one to Shell and one to H2B2 USA. These 3 projects are located in the Inland Empire, the Central Valley, and the Bay Area. One of the things I should have also included here, the Energy Commission within the last couple of months funded the University of California at Irvine for a renewable hydrogen production roadmap. So a strategy document about how we really expand beyond these projects, renewable hydrogen, and expand it here in California. So I'm going to try on after the webinar, include that information in the slides here so you have it and you can link to it. And as part of that, kind of following up on the resources page we talked about, but also hydrogen, there's a lot of hydrogen is now being talked about, especially in the last year, in a way that I've not seen before in my 6.5 years with the partnership. And one of them was the recent IPCC report on climate change that just came out. And you can see from the quote that as that panel talks about how we decarbonize, they talked about the various ways we can do that. And the first 2 items they mentioned were electrification and hydrogen. And so you're beginning to see this in documents across the globe. These are the documents we are adding into the resource page. So you're always welcome to come back and kind of see what we've added. That's a pretty much of a dynamic page, to say the least. So as we start to move beyond other states, we don't have much more of an update on the Northeast like we did last time. There's still 4 stations. 4 stations that are built and awaiting vehicles. And talking with the developers, it's clear they're going to wait till they have a sufficient number of stations that are ready to go before you see Honda and Toyota beginning to lease and sell vehicles. But we are seeing progress. There's some details here and there. There's been a few updates in the timelines on these when you compare it to the last slide. So in the Pacific Northwest, as you remember, we talked about the first retail station opened up in the Vancouver area. A company called H-Tech is developing a total of 6 stations in British Columbia. And they've also recently signed a partnership with a petroleum group in Quebec that owns about 400 petroleum stations. So don't be surprised if we start to kind of branch out and kind of give not just a Pacific Northwest, but a Pacific Northwest and Canadian update in the near future. And go to the next slide, Ben, because this is a map that was provided by a colleague out of H-Tech to kind of show you where those stations are going. Now, sometimes you'll hear 6 stations being mentioned, and other times you'll hear 7 stations. And on the map to the right, You'll see the Power Tech station. That technically is not, my understanding is not a publicly accessible station, but it's kind of counted in the number of stations that you see. And down below, I've included the matrix of where we all are, where these stations are in the timeline. So it's going to be interesting to see how kind of things start to shape up. And as we've been talking about these Vancouver stations, we've also been reaching out to folks in the Washington area as well as the Oregon area and kind of talking with them, because now that you have both California and Vancouver, it's really time to start talking about this North American West Coast Hydrogen Highway. I do know that my colleagues over at the Renewable Hydrogen Alliance, which is based out of Portland, Oregon, they're really Pacific Northwest focused. In talking with them, their membership is starting to grow. They told me they now have, I believe, 4 utilities and 2 electrolyzer companies joining them. There seems to be a lot of growing interest, not just on the vehicle side, but on that whole hydrogen production side. As we mentioned last time, one of the webinar attendees pointed out that Hawaii had opened up its first station. Thank you for, we knew about it, but we had forgot to include them. We don't want to forget about including our siblings over there. There's a lot of activity kind of under the radar happening. There appears to be 2 stations that are in development on the Big Island. We're looking forward to hearing more about them. There's some other smaller stations, legacy stations that may be moving around, and we may see them kind of start to open up at various locations. I'm not sure we're going to see them as publicly accessible stations, but they'll be there kind of in that sort of, it strikes me that Hawaii is still kind of in straddling the demonstration phase and the commercial phase. So when we talk about stations over there, it's important to remember publicly accessible or retail stations versus other operational stations that are behind the fence. So I also wanted to go back, my colleague Chris White pointed out to me, I wanted to clarify a little bit more when we talk about the recent Hydrogen Council announcement about hydrogen fuel and getting to 100% decarbonized hydrogen. So just to clarify, that means most likely a mix of both renewable hydrogen. For example, it could be hydrogen produced through solar and wind power, splitting water, using electrolysis. It could also mean using biogas like dairy methane or agricultural waste methane, and using either steam reformation or using tri-generation fuel cells to generate that hydrogen. And then also but also when talking about decarbonized, it could also mean the possibility of producing hydrogen from kind of fossil fuels or carbon sources where there is carbon capture. So when you start to hear about these kinds of announcements, you'll hear oftentimes not just renewable, but decarbonized. If you look at Senate Bill 100, for example, that has put California on the path to 100% renewable electricity, it also includes a certain percentage as well for decarbonized electricity production. So this is kind of our closing slide. This gives you an idea of kind of what we talked about during the webinar, kind of some of the key highlights. As you can see where we say a network of 35 light-duty retail hydrogen stations, I also wanted to add that as part of that heavy-duty truck pathway, we now have 3 stations that have been funded for heavy-duty, one at the Toyota facility in Long Beach Port, as well as 2 stations that were funded as part of that big CARB announcement I mentioned, one in the Wilmington area just outside the ports, and the other one in the Ontario area. And Ben, I think are we ready for questions now, or are there other items we need to address?
Thanks, Keith. So yeah, with that, again, just a quick reminder that if you have any questions, please use the GoToWebinar application to ask questions. And so with that, I'm going to pass it off to Chris White, our Communications Director, and she will moderate the questions. Chris, any questions?
Yes, there are always a ton of questions, but before we start answering start taking the questions that came in, I do want to mention to everybody that this webinar is being recorded. We'll post it. And all of the questions that come in, we answer in a Q&A. So sometimes I'm not going to take your question on the air. It involves a long answer, but please be assured that every question that gets asked is answered. But first, Keith, did you want to say something about our newest staff member?
Oh, so everyone, I want to welcome. Some of you may remember that the narrator or the lead on previous webinars was our colleague Joe Galliano. He was our hydrogen infrastructure business development guy. Joe led our automaker and station developer teams. I'd like to welcome our newest staff member, David Park. David joins me in Southern California. First off, great guy. We knew just within hours of him joining us that he was perfect for the partnership. He'll be assuming those roles for Joe, and maybe if I can convince him, he will become the newest lead on these webinars.
So, we're thrilled to have David with us. Joe is on the webinar too, and we have to say that Joe is a great guy as well.
Agreed.
So, Keith, the first question, we always get a number of questions about, is there a station coming to name your city here? Can you talk just a little bit about the funding process and how the locations are determined and when that's going to be next time around?
Okay. Can you give me, does someone have a suggestion or an inquiry about a particular location? That may give me a better way to kind of answer this.
Well, anything. We have Sherman Oaks, Palm Desert, the Central Valley.
Okay.
Good. Bay Area, Redding. Everybody, we always get a big variety.
Okay, so here we go. So everyone remember, first off, we have 100 stations that are funded through Assembly Bill 8, or I should say at least 100 strategically located stations. Right now, those 100 stations focus more a little inward, so a lot of your stations, as most of you have realized, are going to be concentrated in urban areas where we have the highest concentrations of early adopters. And those we kind of refer to as neighborhood stations. Also remember, we talk about connector stations. Those stations that will connect up these urban areas. For example, that Coalinga station at Harris Ranch in the middle of the state, that is a connector station. We have, if you look at the station map up at the northern end of the Central Valley, we have the Santa Ynez station that's coming in. That's a connector station. Some of you may see on that map down in Santa Clarita, that I would characterize as a neighborhood station as well as a connector station, because I think for the moment that's going to be kind of the anchor for the lower end of the Central Valley. That's the station you're going to want to fill up before you go up and over the Grapevine. For example, if someone did mention Sherman Oaks, we do have a station that is coming in there. If you look on the map, I believe that's being built by First Element. We should see that. We have dates on the map that show it much better. I don't want to. I'm trying to, from my memory, remember that. If someone is talking about, say, for example, say a Palm Desert or kind of a Coachella Valley station, I can tell you this, that's on the list of destination stations. Remember, neighborhood stations, connector stations, destination stations. So we already have for destination Santa Barbara, we have Truckee, which serves the Lake Tahoe area. Right now we have the Mill Valley station at the northern side of the Bay Area to serve the Napa-Sonoma area, but automakers and others want to definitely see a Napa-Sonoma station, for example. So that also means they want to see a Palm Springs area station. So right now, the station that kind of serves that purpose is really the Riverside station, but I would say in those first 100 stations, Palm Springs will definitely be covered. We know that Sunline Transit out in the Coachella Valley, which has been operating fuel cell buses for 18 years now, they are building a 900 kilogram a day station. And there is quiet talk in the background. I won't characterize it as substantive, but there are a number of people kind of looking into the possibility of, could we, in tandem with this bus fueling station, include a light duty station? But remember, everyone, when we're talking about this, this means money. So a lot of times when we're talking about stations, and you'll often hear me say, call your legislators. Let them know you want to see hydrogen infrastructure. We need that help, and we need your phone calls. Chris, do you think I sufficiently answered that question? Ben, Chris?
Keith, I'll just add in also again that we had questions about where and when, and I just want to point everyone again to that resources page, especially to our hydrogen stations list that have this being displayed right now on the screen. And for instance, Sherman Oaks, we have that's expected to open mid-2019. And again, those dates are, as it gets closer, we'll update those dates. But also, Sacramento, those two stations are also listed as early 2019 as well. Chris?
Yeah, and while you have this up, we always have several questions about exactly where in the process a particular station is. And we really try to give you the best information that we have. But if you have ever had any type of construction project, particularly a large construction project, there are times that the paperwork just takes a long time. And so quite often you'll see a station being listed as a phase that is in permitting or at planning commission, and it can just sit there for months while the city does its work. Once the station actually gets its permits and construction starts, the station developers are better able to give us ideas of when things move along. So we do try to give you the best information that we have, but sometimes there's just no information to share. So this spreadsheet is updated monthly, and it has what we know. So a couple of quickies that I'm gonna knock off here. People ask about pressure. Cars right now are filling at 700 bar or H70. The trucks and buses are using H35. We expect as stations develop in the future that you'll see H70 at passenger vehicle stations and H35 at the truck stations. We're also seeing that the newer stations have multiple fueling positions. And we'll see that's different from station to station. And some of them, it's one dispenser with 2 nozzles, and others, they'll have 2 dispensers. But we are seeing multiple fueling positions, and we expect in the next round of funding, those to increase even more. We now know that we need a lot more storage and a lot more fueling positions at the same time. We also had a question, Keith, I have to knock this one over to you, which is, who is it that's building the ferry? The fuel cell ferry you talked about?
It's a number of partners. We'll have that information for you as we follow up.
Okay, I know it was Red and White Fleet.
Red and White Fleet is the company that will operate it. The name of the company that's kind of leading the process, and I don't have the name in front of me. I believe it's Golden Gate Zero Marine. But I'd like to, I can give you the information in the follow-up next week.
And I'll say that Lisa Marisol corrected me that the Toyota Portal truck fills at H70.
Yes. I was about to add that as well.
Okay, and I also have Golden Gate Zero Emissions Marine.
Yes. Yep. Thank you.
Wade, I see your comment, and I will get there, I promise. Just so you all know, the comment, every time that a new question comes in, it jumps to the bottom of the list. And so the list jumps up and down a little bit. It's a little tricky for me to keep my eyes on what we're talking about. We had a question, speaking of Vancouver, what happened to the buses and the stations that were used during the Winter Olympics? And the answer is those were demonstration vehicles and stations, much like we had here in California. A lot of lessons were learned from those stations. The stations were, I think, largely decommissioned, and the buses all also finished up their operating history and are gone. But that program, very much like the Department of Energy technology validation in California, was really essential for getting us to where we are today. We have a lot of questions about renewable hydrogen and making hydrogen on site. So Keith, can you please address how many stations are in California right now are operating with 100% renewable hydrogen? And then Ben, maybe you can show people how they see that on our station map.
Sure.
Oh, I at least know of 1, 2, 3. There's at least 3 that I know of. I'm sure there are more. There are a couple more that are 100% renewable, but I don't have those at hand. I couldn't give you a specific number at the moment, but we can find that number for you. It's not a problem.
And then on our station map, if you click on any of the stations, right below the image, you'll get a pie chart showing how much of the hydrogen is renewable at that station. And so similar to Keith, I don't know off the top of my head, but that's typically where you would go if you're looking for that information.
And how many of the stations are making their hydrogen on site as opposed to bringing it in by truck?
Oh, that's also a good question as well. Off the top of my head, some, for example, like the AC Transit station, the Emeryville station, some of the hydrogen's being made on site. At the Riverside station, generally speaking, most of it's being made on site. Sometimes it gets deliveries. Cal State LA, although it's not considered a retail station at this time, they make all of their hydrogen on site by electrolysis. Generally speaking, right now, the business model, it makes more sense to make the hydrogen centrally and then deliver it. So there's not a lot of stations out there that do that. Some of the earlier demonstration stations did, but going forward, I'm not sure you're going to see a lot of stations that do that unless they're in a remote area, and that's the best way to make it. It's better to make it and store it on site.
Okay, and are any of our stations right now making hydrogen from biomass or biogas?
I know that the Toyota station at the Long Beach port will be making renewable hydrogen from dairy methane using a tri-generation fuel cell. Previously, the Fountain Valley station, which was at Orange County Sanitation District, that was making renewable hydrogen from sewage for a couple of years, but the funding for that shut down. I know they're hopeful to bring that back, but at the moment, those are the ones that I know of.
I believe the AC Transit has a station that's only for buses that's also making its hydrogen for landfill gas. We had a couple questions that says, what does renewable hydrogen mean? And that means that we're making that hydrogen from some type of renewable energy source. In California, that's wind energy and water, solar energy and water, or biomass and biogas. And so on our website, we have a really great explanation of the different ways to make hydrogen. And all of the hydrogen in California, if it's funded by the state, 33% of hydrogen from transportation has to come from some renewable energy. And that is on a per station basis. So some have 100%, some have 70%, some have 40, some have 33. And there is also, as others have pointed out, quite a few stations outside of California, those providing the hydrogen for forklifts, or sometimes making renewable or on-site power, like at data centers or at Sierra Nevada Brewery, that are also making their hydrogen from biomass or biogas. And we have quite a few examples of those on our website as well. It does require more space to make hydrogen on site than to make it at a different facility. So if you can imagine, think about a gas station. Gas stations could process refined oil into refined gasoline on site, but it makes much more sense to do it at a centralized facility and bring it in. And so part of our revolution as we grow and look at how we get to those 1,000 stations is to really take a look at what is the smart way of doing renewable hydrogen. Should it be done at a station, or should it be done in a central facility or a regional facility? And I don't know the answers to that yet, but our members will be looking at that in the coming years.
Chris, and I'll also add, like I said earlier, one of the, not just our members looking at, or actually one of our members specifically looking at UC Irvine and their renewable hydrogen production roadmap. So that should be very interesting when that comes out. In fact, the Energy Commission just announced that they are going to be having a webinar about that specific roadmap. I believe it's on November 13th, and we'll add that into the answers next week. the date
Perfect.
and the link to it.
So we also had a question about doing a station on wheels, a mobile fueler. And believe me, this was my idea early on. And I have to preface this by saying, not an engineer, I am in marketing. I thought, how perfect would this be? They could come to my office, fill my car, wash the car, vacuum it out. It would be awesome. And the answer is it would be awesome. It would also be super duper expensive. Plus, because it is a fuel, you'd have to get a permit for every single place that you dispense the fuel. And so it starts to be a little tricky. I still believe this is an awesome idea that somebody should pursue, because I would pay extra if you came to my office and vacuumed out my car while you refilled it. So we had a question about, are we working with hydrogen combustion engines and hydrogen blended with natural gas? There are companies that are working on those. It's not within the fuel cell partnership. Early on, the members of the fuel cell partnership decided to focus purely on fuel cell vehicles for on-road and some off-road transportation. We do coordinate with the folks that are working with hydrogen in other industries, and we also coordinate with the folks working on plug-in electric vehicles and on CNG and LNG. We believe that we were all in this together, and if we're going to get off fossil fuels, it takes us working as a community, not as working as competitors. We also had quite a few questions about, are you working with Nell? Nell is a member of the Fuel Cell Partnership. How about Nicola? Nicola's just asked to become a member of the Fuel Cell Partnership. We have a number of automakers like Nissan and Volkswagen and General Motors that don't have fuel cell vehicles yet, but have long been engaged with the Fuel Cell Partnership because they do see that as part of their future. So I think I knocked out a bunch of questions there. A couple of people have asked specific questions about cost of stations and how does the cost apply to the size, and that requires much longer answer than I can give you on the phone, but we do have information about that on our website already, and I'll make sure that I link that to you in the long questions. Gus, I will also follow up with you on exactly who the freight operators are. I don't know that off the top of my head, but we'll include that in the questions as to who are operating the demonstration trucks at the ports. Then a question for you. This comes up on our webinars too about displaying the cost of fuel on SOF.
Yeah, so we hope to start including the price of hydrogen on SOF soon, but at the moment we don't have that availability. And the best way, unfortunately, there's no quick way to check for the price, with the exception of obviously showing up at the station. I don't know if you can call the call center. We'll get that information and share that with you in the Q&A. There was a question about whether we can call the call center or the customer support line to get the current price of hydrogen. Again, we'll post that once we get that information.
All right, and the same thing about tracking data. Are we tracking data about how much hydrogen has been dispensed on a daily basis, per station or cumulatively?
We are tracking it internally. We're still reviewing the data to make sure that it's to check for its accuracy. But I believe there are a couple of other organizations that are tracking that data, and I'm not familiar with if they're planning to publish that, but I know of at least 2 organizations that are tracking it. If you have any specific questions about that, please contact me directly.
Okay, and Andrew mentions that this is also in the December AB8 report that the Air Resources Board published, and we will make sure that everybody has a link to that when it comes, and the cost information, and we'll make sure that when that's available to everybody, we always have that on the front page of our website too, so that should be pretty easy to find, and we'll make sure it's linked to our Q&A. This one's a little bit easier question. Is Hyundai planning to show the Nexo at the car shows this fall? I don't know the answer to that.
I'll answer that one, Chris.
Okay.
They said they are coming to market before the end of this year, and I can pretty much tell you that means they will be at the car show. They've had the Hyundai Tucson at previous car shows, including the last one, so I would say with a fair amount of certainty that the Nexo will be there.
Awesome. We're really lucky that a Nexo is sitting in our parking lot today, and it's a gorgeous car.
And I just talked to the Hyundai rep, and he did say that they will be at the LA Auto Show.
Okay, LA Auto Show. Keith, can you talk really briefly about who is funding the fuel cell freight programs, both stations and trucks? Where are folks getting money for that?
Right now, most of your money is coming out of the Air Resources Board. Some funding as well is coming from the California Energy Commission too. Both agencies tend to fund these projects. As I recall, if you look at the Long Beach Port project with Toyota, I believe the station component has been funded by the Energy Commission. If you look at the CARB funding for the Port of LA, Toyota Kenworth Shell project, that's the Air Resources Board. So it's a combination of those two right now. Probably, and in addition, on at least on the vehicle side and maybe even the infrastructure side, if Lisa's listening, the South Coast Air Quality Management District is a fairly significant player in that as well. For example, they funded the Kenworth truck that's going to begin demonstrations out of one of the two ports. So those are pretty much, from what I can tell, your three main funding agencies: the Air Resources Board, the Energy Commission, and South Coast AQMD.
Awesome. Keith, do you know who is developing the Tri-Gen station at the Port of LA?
The Tri-Gen station, which is at actually the Port of Long Beach, is being developed by Shell. The hydrogen for that should be, I believe, being produced by Fuel Cell Energy. That was the last that I saw. Shell has definitely been funded for that, for the infrastructure, and I'm fairly certain that Fuel Cell Energy will be the ones producing that hydrogen.
All right, and we're down here at the bottom. So first, as we're starting to lose people here, we have a request from one of the station developers to make sure you're always looking at SOS before you call the station phone number. SOS is much, it is your first line of defense. Sometimes you'll end up with an overwhelmed phone number with everybody calling, so always glance at SOS first before you call. Second is, can you show Ben while you're on SOS, how do you see the capacity at the station?
Sure. So if you click on any of the stations and it takes you to our detailed page, right below the picture there, you'll have the real-time status and then also the capacity. And so again, this is the dispensable hydrogen at the time for that station.
Does it show you does it show you what it has right now, or the total capacity at the station?
It shows what it has right now.
Okay. I didn't know that. That's good to know. We have a couple of questions about some stations that aren't represented on our map. They're in the Northeast and aren't in AFDC, which is the Alternative Fuel Data Center database, and I have to look into that. I don't know the answer to that one. And our last question, and there are quite a few here too that I need to go through and answer one by one. The hindrance to widespread adoption of fuel cells and hydrogen right now, is it the size of the station? Is it the cost? What is the hindrance? And Keith, I might ask you to answer that.
I'll give you a simple answer. Maybe I can give you a complex answer. So first off, in addition to my work, I do a lot of public outreach. I go to community events. I put on my sun hat, my shorts, and my polo shirt, and I have a car by my side. And I actually talk better to people when I have a car next to me. So I apologize if I didn't do well on this webinar. There's no car near me. But that said, I don't think it's about really the education part that's holding us back. It's really about infrastructure. I think automakers have already shown that if we can build stations, they can sell and lease these cars. That's probably a simplistic way of putting it, but it's about infrastructure. Infrastructure. And I will again repeat, for those of you, and it doesn't matter what state you're living in, you call your legislators and you talk with them about wanting hydrogen infrastructure. And I want you to do this for a number of reasons. You don't have to have a complex argument for them. They need to hear the words hydrogen and fuel cell. They're not hearing it. They're not hearing it enough. I'm happy to. If you're not sure what to say to your legislators, give me a ring or email me. I'll be happy to assist you. That is an incredibly important part. We cannot get this pathway moving unless we have a true partnership between government and the private sector. And so it's absolutely critical that if you have not talked, here in California especially, with your state legislators, you need to call and let them know. They are happy to listen to you. They're happy to hear from you. And I don't think you really need at this time a complex message. Maybe next year as we start to see some legislation, then of course, certainly you'll need message points or talking points. But right now, you just need to let them know that there's enthusiasm out there. There is an interest in these vehicles. So that's my as God is my witness statement.
All right. Well, John Parkin just gave you a here in the comments. And so with that, I think we are going to close this off. Again, we will answer all of these questions. Some of them were very detailed and asked some information that we need to research. But every question that popped up here, you will see either literally or paraphrased in our Q&A, and we should have that by the middle of next week.
And I also want to add, Ben, I also just quickly want to add, you have Ben's email address and you have my email address. And we also mentioned a third email address, info@cafcp.org. If you haven't noticed and you haven't met us before, we're pretty chatty and we like to help answer your questions. So don't be afraid to reach out to us.
All right, again, thank you everyone for coming on to the webinar, and we'll have this information for you early next week. An email will be sent out with a link to the webinar, as well, or the recording, as well as the Q&A. Thank you.